There's an old Arab proverb that says this: all sunshine and no rain makes a desert. Okay, that one failed. Because one of the things that you need to understand, and that is this: your life and my life is a mixture of good times and bad times. It's also a mixture of highs and lows and everything that we do. And then also it's going to be some mountains and some valleys. And so many times what we want is we want flat ground. And it doesn't work that way, because you need to understand something, and that is this: I don't know what you're going through today, and I don't know what valley that you might be in, but you need to understand one thing. Even if you are in your darkest valley right now, you need to know that God is right there with you if you are his children. Because he is telling us that. Because we've been memorizing, again, Psalms chapter 23. And again, I don't see them in front of me. I have no idea what's going on in the back of me. So I'm hoping they keep up with me. So, should be Psalms 23, 1 through 4. Okay? The Lord is my shepherd. Y'all, what you reading? Everybody's kind of looking down. Oh, you're reading those? Okay, cool. Now that you're reading those, you can see those because you can't see it up here. What you need to do is, we are going back to elementary school. You are going to read out loud what you are seeing, if you would, please. And we will say this together. And you know why we keep repeating this over and over and over again? You can see something but not retain it. But if you keep repeating over and over and over again what you're seeing, and you're verbalizing it, basically after 7 times, you'll have it memorized. So what I want you to do is memorize the scripture, okay? Again, whether you use the NIV, ASV, QRS, however you've got the old King James, you want to memorize it there. However you want to memorize it, that's cool, okay? But today I need you to read with me so we don't have a bunch of garbly stuff, okay? So read with me. The Lord is my shepherd. I have everything that I need. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the right paths for his name's sake. And even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. That is absolutely awesome. We take attendance on Sunday, so if you're a visitor, we'll get your name, and we'll know everybody that's been here by name. And when we get to heaven and God asks, how did you guys do today? I'm going to tell him absolutely wonderful. That you all got an A on being able to follow directions. Okay? And that'll be really good. Okay? But when you look at this, the phrase, when he says there, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Now you need to understand something. When we look at this, we start thinking about things. But you've got to understand the perspective in which David is writing this psalm. In Israel, where David was from, there was a place that was called the valley of the shadow of death. And so when they were reading this, they understood about this valley. When you go through here, it was very narrow at the bottom of this valley. And on both sides of this valley were mountains that basically would run about 800 feet high. So when you're at the bottom of a valley, it is very narrow valley with 2 high mountains on either side. And those mountains are there. Very seldom are you going to see any light. And so they called this the valley of the shadow of death, because it was basically shadows from the mountains with no sunlight being let in. So when you're there, maybe the only time that you would ever see the sunlight is if you were standing in that valley and it was noon and the sun was right above you. As soon as it started moving, it went away. You are back now in that shadow. So just for a very short moment of time, that's all you would see, is nothing but darkness. And when he said that valley, you need to understand that that word valley, there was a king by the name of Ahab. And what had happened was the Syrian army had decided that what they were going to do was they were going to get rid of Ahab, okay? And so what ended up happening was the king of Syria lined up 32 different armies. 32 armies. And they were coming against Israel. And when they came against Israel, Israel had one army. The king of Syria coming against Ahab, the king of Israel, coming against those people, he had 32 armies that had joined together to come together to destroy Ahab and them, okay? So what had happened was they found out that they lost the battle, okay? So in 1 Kings chapter 20 and verse number 23, what you'll find is that the Syrians decided, okay, listen, when we came against the Israelites in the valley, we couldn't defeat them because we were coming in here and they were in the mountains. So we got to do something different, okay? So 1 Kings chapter 20 and verse number 23 says this: the Syrian military advisors went to the king and explained, Israel's gods are the gods of the hills. And the last time we fought them, which was a year ago, when they had lost, he said, we fought them in the hills. And that's why they defeated us, because we tried to fight them in the hills. We can't do that. So what did they say? But if we fight them in the valleys where they are weak, we will defeat them there. And so they're making plans. This is what we're going to do. We can't attack them in the hills, so now let's attack them in the valleys. And so that was their plans. They did this. They decided, okay, we're going to fight them there. And so David is beginning to understand this. But if you go back to 1 Kings chapter 20 and verse number 27, where they thought that, okay, their God just protects them in the hills, so we're going to defeat them in the valleys. So they adjust their plans. 1 Kings chapter 20 and verse number 27 says this: the Syrian forces covered the whole countryside, but the Israelites looked like two little flocks of goats. They were totally and completely outnumbered. They're going to fight this war, and they can't do anything. So the next verse out of 1 Kings chapter 20 and verse number 28 says this: but the Syrians think that I'm the only God of the hills and not that I am God of the valleys. He says, I'm going to give you the victory over the huge army so everyone will know that I am the Lord. Remember that old Southern gospel song that says, he's the God of the valley. He's the God of the mountains. He is God no matter where the battle gets hit or where you're getting hit. Whether it is on the hilltop or in the valley, God is going to be there to protect you. That's his job. And what we need to understand is this. If we could summarize all of this up, it was very easy. God is God. Amen. And no matter what, whether you have a mountaintop experience God's there. Whether you've got a valley experience, God is still there. Now, when you begin to look at these, and you talk about valleys, there's a whole lot of places which are valleys in the Bible. But today I'm going to give you 3 that I've kind of picked out, okay? Because what happens is this. A lot of times we look at the Bible as just a history book, okay? And it's more than just a history book. A lot of times what the Bible is filled with is what is called a bunch of metaphors, okay? It says something, but what you've got to do is understand what's underneath it. For instance, every place that they went, they would name it because of a certain experience that they were having. It's like, for instance, I have my new grandson here. He is called Theo, okay? That is his name. But his real name is Theodore Oliver Timothy. I'm sorry. It's Timothy. Yeah, it's not Theodore. I got it all mixed up. It's Timothy Oliver Cotton, okay? And they picked that for two reasons. The Timothy is the name after his father. The Oliver is the name after his mother, who is Olivia. And so they chose those names for that particular reason. But they also said that they're going to nickname him Theo, okay? If you go back and look at the name Timothy, it actually comes from the Greek word called theos, Theos, which means God is with me. And sometimes, inadvertently, we may do something and not realize what it is, but now we know what that means, and so we call him Theo. Why? God is with me. So every time we call him Theo, I know that God's with him. I know that God's protecting him. I know God is doing those things. Okay? And so this is the same thing with you and I. God has given each and every one of us, his children, a name. Have no idea what my name is, but when I get to heaven, I will understand exactly what God thought of me. You want to know why? Because he's going to tell me what my name was. And I'm going to understand what that name meant. Okay? Some of you might be named last place. You know, you don't know. Okay? You don't want to be there. But what you want to do, each and every one of us as children, we want to please our Father. And we want to stand up and let him be proud of us for the name that he has chosen for every one of us in the plans that he has given me. Okay? So when you talk about the valley, there was the valley which was called the Valley of Troubles. And that was a valley that was called Achor. Okay? The valley also talks about a valley of weeping. It says that, difficult times. And so God told them, he says, listen, I'm not just the God of the mountaintops. Okay? I'm also other of everything about you, everything that you're going through, everything that's happening in your life. I'm still your God. I'm not throwing you away because of the experience and whatever it is. So, I don't know what kind of valley you're going through right now. In this pandemic that they call it, whatever, there are people that are going through financial troubles. There are people that are having problems paying their rent. And so the government decided, we will help you pay your rent. And when the money runs out, what happens? Now it's, how do I pay for my rent? I'm not working, I can't get a job, or I get a job and it's not enough. Landlord has raised the price of rent. And even if the landlord hasn't raised the price of rent, all you got to do is look at the gas station when you drive by it. A year ago, it was $1.89. Now it's $3.09. Go buy some bananas. Go to your grocery store and you see the prices are going up. The prices of houses are rising and people are still buying them. But eventually the bubble's going to burst. And when it does, what's going to happen? Because you're going to hit a valley. And it's going to occur. As we were talking this morning, I don't think it's far. I think it's pretty close because a lot of things are already set in place. As I was sharing with you, the app, in this, I forget your name. Linda. No, that's why I forgot your name, because Linda. No. They know that joke, you know. But we were talking where they're already trying to do microchips. And I shared with you, and some people say they can't do that. How many of you all got credit cards? Or debit cards? Okay. How many of your debit cards have chips on them? Guess what's on that chip? All your information. Guess what they can also tell you about that's covered on that chip? Everything about you. I don't need a card anymore. They've already got the scanners in there. All you do is Apple Pay, Google Pay, whatever. You just hold the card up there, hold your phone up there, they read it. It automatically takes the money straight out of your account. You want to know why? You need to be honest and read. We are coming to a cashless society. And there's a lot of people that are taking already and investing all their money in gold and stuff. But eventually, somebody's going to control all of this. So, let's talk about valleys. One of the things that you need to realize is valleys are part of our life. We don't like it. We don't love it. But you got to understand that it is there. They're inevitable because you can't avoid them. You can't go from one mountaintop to another. You've got to come down off the mountaintop. And where are you going to go? You're not Superman. You're not a Marvel hero. You can't jump from mountaintop to mountaintop. So you're going through these peaks and valleys. And that's your life. It's almost like if you ever read your echocardiogram or when they're taking that, you're seeing these things going up and down and up and down. That's your life. Your heart is really telling you this is what your life looks like. Up and down, up and down, up and down. You hope it stays steady. But may I say this to you? Most of the time it doesn't. It's almost like you're having a heart attack where it's very erratic in this. But what did God say? In Deuteronomy chapter 11, in verse 11, God's plan for all of us was to have these hills and valleys. But look at what he said. Talking to his children, he said this: the promised land you're headed, or you're about to enter, is a land of what? It's hills and valleys. Hills and valleys. So may I say this? Just as God was speaking to the children of Israel, God is saying the same thing to you and I today. This land that I promised you, guess what? That you're entering into, it's going to be hills and valleys. These preachers that stand up and tell you, if you give your life to Jesus, that everything's going to be wonderful, don't read the Bible. They're reading something else. I think it's Grimm's fairy tales or Dr. Seuss, or Cat in the Hat or whatever. I don't care, whatever you want to read, because they're not reading Scripture. The Scripture says that the promised land that you're about to enter to is a land that's filled with hills and valleys. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse number 12 says this: don't be surprised when you are tested by troubles or painful suffering, as if something unusual is happening to you. What do? Oh God, why me? What did I do? I don't deserve this. I'm surprised, God, that you would do this to me. And Peter says, hey, don't be surprised. Who do you think you are? As a matter of fact, may I tell you this? None of this should ever hit you blindsided. We should be prepared. I'm not saying that you go around all day long thinking that the world's going to end. The world's going to end. The world's going to end, and when it does, we're gone. Okay? And that's cool. We're gone. Because I'm out of here. Okay? And if I don't show up next Sunday and you all are here, we know what the rapture happened and maybe you got left. I don't know. Or maybe I just died. I don't know. That's what you better hope. Okay? But when we begin to say, why me? That's the wrong. Because God says back to you, why not you? My son suffered. Do you think you're better than he is? No. Paul says, I count it a pleasure to suffer with Christ. Because he counts us worthy as children to help us to grow. He's not trying to stunt your growth. He's trying to help you to grow. And when we face these things, it challenges us. It makes us stronger. It was never meant to make us weaker, okay? Number 2, valleys happen to everybody. Psalms 34, verse number 19 says, the good man does not escape all troubles. He has them too. But the Lord helps him in each and every one. Everybody goes around saying, I hear these people all the time saying, I've got problems. Why is God punishing me? Wrong thought. God isn't punishing you. Okay? So many times people think that God puts things upon us to make us fail. Not at all. God, with you, makes the same statement as he did with Job. Have you considered my servant? When Satan comes and wants to do something. Have you considered this one? Yeah, I've considered him, but you've got him hedged up. I can't do anything. Lower the hedge and see what they'll do. He says, I'll lower it because I know my child. It wasn't there to make you fail. It was there to show that God is still God and he is still in control and that Satan is not in control. And at the same time to make you stronger, to understand that I get my strength not from inside of me, I get my strength from what's inside of me. Amen. The Holy Spirit. And we begin to understand these things out of there. Matthew chapter 5 and verse number 45, look at what he says. The rain falls on the just and the unjust. You say, that's a very appropriate for this week. You look at the hurricane that hit. It hit New Orleans and then went over to the East Coast. First time in years that they've been hit. It talks of stories. There was a man, I think he was 78 years old. Him and his wife saw the floodwaters rising. He got his wife to the truck and then realized that his neighbor was still in her house. He went back to try to get her out of the house, and the floodwaters came up so quickly that it killed him and the woman he was trying to save, but his wife was safe. And some people say, but that's not right. He was only trying to save her. Why did he give his life? Why did God that have to do? Because God's trying to tell us there are times we lay down our lives for other people. We're doing exactly what Christ wants us to do. Show people that we love them. Not by just our words, but by our actions in the things that we do. So we need to understand that God's not punishing us. So again, he says the rain falls on the just as well as the unjust. And number 3 is you need to understand that valleys are unpredictable. So, I don't know how many of you all have ever made a trip. And you planned your trip out. That here's the route that I'm going to follow to go there. So you get in your car, you're following your map or Google or whatever that you're following. All of a sudden, it tells you there's a detour. That the path that you were going to take is going to take you a different way. And in that path that it's going to take you, there's going to be some hills. You thought you had everything planned out that you're just going to do flatland interstate. And this is cool and everything. And so I don't have to do these hills and valleys and hills and valleys. And then all of a sudden, I hit this detour. And all of a sudden, my plans are shot. May I say this to you, the detour that you think is in your life may surprise you, but may I say to you, that detour never surprised God. He already knew where he was going to lead you into those things. So we begin to understand this. Proverbs chapter 27 and verse number 1 says this: don't ever brag about tomorrow, since you don't know what the day will bring forth. You may say, here's my plans for tomorrow, but you have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. There's a lot of people that had plans that they were going to be here this weekend, but guess what? Their plans got shot. They got exposed to somebody that has COVID, and some of them now have it. And so like we told them, quarantine, guys. Don't come in here. We're to keep safe, you know, and we can do that by social distancing and stuff of that sort. But sometimes we need to understand these things that are there. So let's talk about these valleys. Number 1 is called the Valley of Siddim, okay, S-I-D-D-I-M. And this valley, that was the last verse. You guys keep looking like strange looks on there, okay? Okay. So, there was the Valley of Siddim, okay? And this is in Genesis chapter 14. How many of you all have ever read or saw the movie The Lord of the Rings? Yeah, a long time ago, it doesn't matter, okay? You need to understand that in The Lord of the Rings, there was this big climactic battle, and it was called the Battle of 5 Armies, okay? Well, in Genesis chapter 14, there's a bigger battle. And this battle is the battle of 19 or 9 armies, okay? And so here's the story. There's 4 enemy nations that are outside of Palestine, and they're trying to overtake Palestine, okay? And this is before Israel had become a nation. So there's these 4 armies that are out there, and they're trying to take over these 5 tribes that are inside. And they're fighting for their life, okay? And what you'll find is this, and I think it should be on the screen. Then the 4 kings of Shinar, and Shinar is now the place that we call Babylon, okay? And the king of there was Elsar, Elam, and Goam. And these 4 kings went to war against the 5 kings of Sodom. And you've kind of heard of what Sodom is? Does that ring a bell? Against Sodom, and another place that you might know, a little place called Gomorrah, okay? And these 3 other cities, they didn't mention, just 3 other cities. It said the 5 kings joined forces in the Valley of Siddim, okay? Now, I want you to understand, this is the first one that I want you to understand what the Valley of Siddim is, okay? Because you may be going through the Valley of Siddim. You know what the Valley of Siddim is called today? Yeah, you can read, cool. I gave you the answers, which means you're following along, which is good, which is called the Dead Sea. And guess what? How did the Dead Sea come about? Do you remember? Sodom and Gomorrah. When God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, he said there was not going to be any more life in this place. And so what happened? It is the Dead Sea. Because all that happens is the salt water comes in and has no way to go out. And you can't grow anything there. Everything's dead. Because he said of the things that they did. So it says, the 5 kings joined their forces in Sidon, which is now the Dead Sea. For 12 years, they've been oppressed by other kingdoms. So in the 13th year, they rebelled. But in the 14th year, their oppressor recruited his allies to team up and to reconquer the land. So they're saying, listen, we're tired of paying taxes. Sound familiar? We're tired. We're tired of all of this stuff. And so listen, these 4 armies come against 5 armies. So it says the 9 armies fought in the valley of Siddim. Next verse, look at what it says. Now this valley was full of sticky tar pits. Do you remember in your time at school when you read about prehistoric animals? Remember there were these prehistoric animals that got stuck in these tar pits? They didn't teach you that? Okay. So they would get stuck. But look at what it said. And when they, what happened? Now this valley was full of sticky tar pits, and when the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah tried to run away from the battle, they slipped and they fell and got stuck in the pits. So now you've got 2 of the kings are now stuck in the tar pits, okay? So the invaders plundered the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they took everything they had, okay? But look, they also captured Adam's nephew Lot, who was living in Sodom. Lot took away and ended up coming back, because you know that later on Abraham goes back and was told, he was trying to bring war and free his nephew. Okay, so what happens is this: when the enemy was attacking them, what did they do? They ran away. And what happened? They got stuck. How many times in your life has a problem occurred or a problem has come up and you tried to run away and you hit a place where you just get stuck? And you feel like you're stuck in the tar pit. You can't move. Whatever it is that has got you controlled at that point in time, you have no idea. You just know, I'm stuck. I don't know which way to go. I don't know which way to turn. I've tried this, and none of this has worked. And so we begin to understand that Siddim was meant to be called the valley of failure. It's where you slip, fall back, and get stuck. This is why some of you all, I know you get irritated every once in a while, because if you're not here, if you miss 2 weeks, we send a card to you that says, hey, we missed you. We're missing you. I hope everything's okay. And people say, why do you keep doing this? Because when you hit the 3rd week, in the 4th week, in the 5th week, you're stuck. You're stuck. Because now you're stuck in a pattern that says, I found things that are more important, that I don't need that. You say, how do you know? Been there, done that. My first week and 2 weeks and 3 weeks turned into 2 years, 3 years. I understand what it's like, and I understand what's there. So, my question to you, number one, is what's your Siddim valley today? Okay? You may feel like you're stuck. Maybe it's an addiction, something that you just can't break free from. There's another valley that is found in Numbers chapter 13. okay? And it's a story in Numbers chapter 13 where Moses sends out the spies to the land, the promised land, and to ask what's it going to look like. You remember they're being held over here on the side. They go over and they look and they come back, and God said, here's what I want you to do. And do you understand that from the travel time from Egypt to Israel should have only taken them 3 to 4 weeks? But it took them 40 years. I don't know about y'all, but if you're coming to my house and you're going to tell me you're going to be there in 3 days, I expect you to be there in 3 days, not 40 years. You may come back and say, well, I took the scenic view. Yeah, I don't know where you went, what you're seeing, but it's here. This is what God said. But look at, and he chose the 12 guys to go do this. So look at what happened. In Numbers chapter 13 and verse number 23, it says, then the spies came to the valley of Eshul. Okay? The fruit was so abundant that they cut off a grape branch, which had a giant cluster of grapes on it, but it was so large and heavy that it took 2 men to carry it back on a pole between them. Now, I don't know about you all, but I have never gone to Kroger or Myers and got a clump of dirt where it took me to have to get somebody else to help me carry it to the car. Have you? No. But this is what they got. They had this cluster of grapes. When you go to Kroger and you get your grapes, pick up and see how many clusters you get in that bag. Sometimes you get one, you get more than one, because most of the time it's about 2 or 3 clusters of grapes that you'll get. And some that have fallen off, the leftovers and whatever that they just cram in the bags and then they'll weigh them later, because they're not weighed by pounds. It's whatever they can get in there. So anyway, it was so heavy they couldn't carry it, okay? But look at what happened. It says so heavy that it took 2 men to carry it back on a pole between them. They also brought samples of beautiful pomegranates and figs, okay? So in Numbers chapter 13, verse 27 to 33, here's what it says. This was their report to Moses. It is indeed a magnificent country. It is rich and fertile. And here's some fruit as proof, okay? But the people living there, they are powerful. Notice the but. Here's what we got. We got all these grapes. We got all these figs. We got all these pomegranates. Man, it is just a land filled with good stuff to eat. Now, grapes I'll handle. The figs and the pomegranates, if the figs are in fig Newtons, I'll handle those. Pomegranates, I'm not so sure about, okay? But I'll handle the other stuff. But they came back and they said, okay, here's what we got. Here's what we're going to eat. So what did they do? It says, but the people living there are powerful. They're stronger than we are, and they look like giants to us. In our own eyes, we felt as small as grasshoppers next to them. So when you begin to look at this valley of Eshul, Eshul means the valley of fear. I'm afraid. I don't know what's going on. So what happens is, in the valley of fear, you either move on or give up. And what happened? The children of Israel gave up. And what happened? That generation died in the desert when they were right on the verge of going to the promised land. Because they didn't trust God and what he said. There's another valley, and it's called Elah, E-L-A-H. And it is in 1 Samuel chapter 17. Again, I hope the verses are up here. It's 1 Samuel 17, 2 to 4, and then down to verse 11. Saul and the Israelites camped in the valley of Elah, and they drew a battle plan to fight the Philistines. The Philistines and the Israelites each stood their ground, shouting and taunting each other from opposite hills with the valley of Elah between them. Now the Philistine army had a champion fighter. You remember this story? A giant champion fighter named Goliath, who was about 9 feet tall. He was cool for the NBA. Okay? I mean, all he had to do was just stand there and just put the ball in. It's only 10 feet, and his arms have got to be more than 2 feet long. So all he's got to do is just stand there. He was Goliath. But look at what it said. When Saul and the Israelites saw this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. But this little guy who wrote the song that says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I have everything I need," said this: "Don't worry about a thing. I'll go fight the Philistine. I'll do that." Everybody is afraid, okay? And they were scared to death. And you need to understand that Elah, it's called the Valley of Conflict, okay? It's when you're facing that giant challenge. And I'm sure that every one of you have probably hit a time in your life that you have got a giant challenge in front of you. And you don't know what to do, okay? And this is, when we begin to look at this is what the psalmist is writing when he says that, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." Okay? They understood what the valley of death was, but they also understood there's all these other valleys and all of the writings that's there. And when you begin to understand what's there, you need to understand what's going on. There's also another one that's in Psalm chapter 44 or 84, and it's called the Valley of Baca, B-A-C-A, okay? And the word Baca means weeping. It means to weep. And in there, it was like a desert, okay? Now understand this is the context. The Valley of Baca is a desert. Okay, but it's called the Valley of Weeping for a reason. Psalms 85 verses 5 through 7. "Blessed are those whose strength comes from the Lord. As they pass through the Valley of Baca," or the Valley of Weeping, "they make it a place of springs." What? We're in a desert. How in the world can a spring of water come up in the desert? But look what he says. "They make it a place of springs, and the autumn rains cover it with pools. They go from strength to strength, growing until each appears before God in Zion." So what we need to understand is this. When you go into that valley, like Baca of weeping, okay, when you go there, it's like you have no feelings. You're drained. You don't know what to do. And what's the very first thing that most of the time when every one of us hit that valley, what do we start doing? Crying. We start crying and weeping. And here's what you need to understand. When you and I stand before God, He is not going to ask you how much money that you had in your bank account. He's not going to ask about what you did for your life. What He's going to ask you, and not even ask you, what He's concerned about is your character. Who you are. Your makeup, your thoughts, and everything that's there. William Booth founded the Salvation Army, okay? And they founded it in England. And there was a guy from the United States that sent to William Booth, and here's what he ended up, or here's what he was saying. William Booth was the founder of the Salvation Army in America, and so what he did is he sent a man over to England, and here's what he said. He said, "Listen, this guy's been trying to reach people in this community for the Lord, and he kept saying, I've tried everything. I've tried prayer. I've tried music. I've tried services. I've tried special attractions. And there's just, nobody's interested in hearing the good news." And William Booth wrote back 2 words on the telegram. Try weeping. Try weeping. When's the last time that you hit a problem so strong that you just started crying out to the Lord? It works. He works. He said, try weeping. Okay? We talked about the valley of Baca is grief and bitterness. So, let me give you these things. 3 things that I want you to remember when you're in the valley. Number 1, remember I'm not alone. God's with me. No matter where you're at, if you're a child of God, God has not deserted you. He is with you and always will be. Okay? Psalms chapter 23, verse 4. Look at what he said. Even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? For thou art with me. You're there with me. Now look at what he said. You need to circle that word shadow. Because when you're walking through the valley of the shadow of death, you need to understand something. Soon, this shadow of death is going to be crossing your path. Every one of us are going to die. The psalmist David said, even when I hit that time, I'm not going to fear. Because I know you're going to be with me. I am a firm believer. I really am. I read Moses and stuff that is there. That even when a child of God dies, Satan does his best to try to take the remains of that individual. Because he's still trying his best to conquer. Saying, I want to show you that I got control. I got control. But I'm a firm believer that as I've talked to a lot of people, where they're laying on their deathbed, and they'll tell you, I see so-and-so. I see so-and-so. I see so-and-so. You don't see him? No, I don't. I don't see him. Oh, but I do. I believe when we all hit that point, I believe God's going to be with us. Why? Because I think God's going to take that soul and escort it back to his presence. And even in that, Satan's going to try to get it, but he can't. Because God is with me. And the psalmist David, he knew that. Number 2, I'll skip some of the things, Job and those. And so let's just go down to point number 2. Remember that God has a good purpose for my valley. No matter what that valley is, God's there. In Romans chapter 5, verses 3 to 5, look at what it says. We can even rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that sufferings produce endurance. Endurance produces character. Character produces hope. And that kind of hope does not disappoint us. Okay? It says this kind of hope does not disappoint us because God has poured his love into our hearts. Into who we are. That's where his love is. That's my character. What does the Bible say? The very first fruit of the Spirit is what? Love. He also says this in John. He says, how can you say that you love God who you have not seen and hate your brother who you have seen? He says, if you say that you love me and hate your brother, he says, then I want to tell you something, that love is not in you. You don't have love. So, a few weeks ago, we were talking. I don't have to like what people do, but I still got to love the person. That includes my children, my wife, my spouse, my whoever. Okay, church members, you know. There are some times we don't get along, but we still love each other. Because why? Because we have that. And number 3, last thing, is remember that the reward will last forever. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 17. Here's what you need to remember. For our present troubles are quite small, and they won't last very long. Yet they are producing in us an eternal glory that will last forever and is greater than anything we can imagine. I have no idea what heaven's going to be like. We got these visions. And may I say this to you? You can dream up the best vision that you've got, and it ain't good enough. You're going to be surprised at what you see, because we need to understand that until we get there, we're going to face these valleys. They're going to happen. And David said this. So what did he say? He says, I fear no evil. Why? He says, because you are with me. He didn't say, I'll fear no evil because he's with me. He's saying, I don't fear anything because you're with me. He wants to know exactly who's with him. It wasn't anybody else. It was you, God. You are with me. And so listen, when we do these things, in Joel chapter 3, verse 14, this scripture is one to finish with, because it says multitudes, yes, multitudes are in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. When you start looking at things today, you've got to start making decisions. You think about it. I've got to make the decision on whether I want to take the vaccine or not take the vaccine. I've got to make the decision that I took the vaccine, both shots, and do I need a booster? I've got to make a decision on whether to wear a mask or not wear a mask. I've got to make a decision on if they make it mandatory that I have to be vaccinated and I have to wear a mask, or else I can't attend school or I can't work in that job. I've got to make a decision. What do I do? Go to school, not go to school. Work or not work. Someone's sick. I've got to decide what I'm going to do. Look at what he said in Joel. Multitudes of decisions. Because why? The day of the Lord is near. I don't know about you, but I believe we are having to make more and more decisions today in our everyday life than we've ever had to make before. Everybody keeps saying, let's go back to the way life was. It was so simple. No, it wasn't. It was still difficult. But may I say this to you, it's getting difficulter or more difficult. And this isn't the end of it. This is just the brink of the beginning. So what's your decision?